So technically, I think this would fall under the nobody teaches this category of my videos, but in reality, you could say nobody wants to tell you this, and that is ultimately talent does not exist. Okay, let me break that down for you a little bit. I'm not actually being 100% serious as every single video on the internet, and we'll go into later why there are certainly signs and things that you can point out about people being more naturally gifted about things than not. But let's sort of frame this from a philosophical standpoint for a second. There was this guy named Jean-Paul Sartre, and he had this idea of radical free will. What the idea of radical free will is, and I'm sure philosophers are going to get into the comments, I hope they do, and correct me, but in my opinion, it's like this. If you were thrown in prison, you have your freedom taken away from you, correct? You can't go out, you can't do the things you normally do. Wrong. You have radical free will in that moment. You can choose. Was it a just verdict to send you to prison? Was it a thing that you didn't do that you were wrongfully accused from? Are you treating it like a vacation away from friends and family? Are you angry about it? You can affect your emotional state. You can affect the framing. So even in the midst of a lack of freedom, there's actually an abundance of freedom. Now, this is why I say talent does not exist. The whole framework around talent in music is one that is going to naturally motivate you less. You are going to feel less capable and less able to do certain things. Imagine I gave you one of two scenarios. You meet this amazingly talented musician, and they're in their early 20s. And let's say, for the sense of, just making this relatable, they're like 5 years younger than you, right? You're in your late 20s, they're in their early 20s. You've dabbled with music, but you've never been that serious about it. And they sit down and they just blast out, and they're just amazing. And you're like, how? How? They're younger than me. They're better looking than me. They're more accomplished than me. They make more money than me. They're better in every way than me, right? And you start to talk to them a little bit more, and you realize they really sacrificed a lot to get there. They spent hours upon hours practicing, honing their craft. They also had parents that were there guiding them from a very young age, showing them what was possible with music. Then they had instructors and mentors that guided them the whole entire way. Now, you can take that information and go, wow, life isn't fair. I did not have those advantages. But you also can realize it makes sense. The narrative makes sense. And then you can choose in that moment what you take from that. Do I take that I need to work harder? Or that life's not fair and I maybe made different choices, different positive choices, right? Hey, I hang out with my kids a little bit more than I play piano. There's nothing wrong with that, but you're not going to be as good a piano player as somebody who, instead of having kids, just practices piano all day. Let's imagine this scenario from a different framework. Same exact setup. You meet somebody early 20s, you're late 20s, they play amazingly, they're crushing it, and you meet them and they're just like, oh, it just comes easy to me. Like, I've always played this way. Oh, were your parents being? Yeah, I mean, they dabbled, but whatever. Oh, how about some mentors? Yeah, I had some people who told me, but I just always have sounded this way. That is going to come across to you one of two ways. Either one is they're a freak, right? They're not human. How many times do you hear this language? I personally hate when I hear phrases like this because all of them dehumanize both the artist and also the ability to get there. It becomes something that's unattainable. One of my favorite things in music is when you hear mistakes by someone who is one of your heroes because it humanizes them. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to go there in just a second. But let's go back to this scenario. The takeaway is going to be, I can't do that. I don't have the ability. I'm not talented enough. And it allows you to off-put the blame and the resources and the ability to actually accomplish that. Now, why is that so much of a problem? In my opinion, the problem with that is you're never going to get to the situation you want to. And I know what you're thinking. I know your arguments. We're gonna get there. Don't worry. Believe me, I want to address some very valid counter arguments to this idea that talent does not exist. But let's just stay there a little bit longer. Going back to where someone famous, Stevie Wonder concert, right? And he's making mistakes, right? You hear the mistakes. What that does is it humanizes it. It goes, oh, I could do that. I make mistakes. He makes mistakes. We're the same. Now, are you the same? No. And there are definitely musicians that I hear that it's really shocking how far better they are than me. But for the most part, I can understand and justify and go, oh, if I was able to spend 3, 4, 5 more hours a day practicing, I would actually be able to achieve the same thing that they achieved. And then I can make a logical viewpoint of what I want to do with my own time. Now, let's get into some of the counter arguments. So first of all, we can just go straight to the extremes and rule them out. I have no doubt, and I know personally in my experience, people who have perfect pitch from birth, and I also know people who are tone deaf from birth. So those two extreme examples, of course, are where it almost makes it either so hard to get into music that to overcome that is almost impossible. It's not impossible, by the way. If you're tone deaf, don't feel like you can't do music. It is still possible to get even good at music. But let's imagine you have that. And then on the other hand, you have the person who has perfect pitch. Of course, if they do anything with music, my father-in-law is that way, boom, it's just going to connect right away. It's going to work right away. Let's start using an analogy for a second. If you've got high school boys and they're wanting to compete in the NBA, the boy that's 7 feet tall, even if they're not very good at basketball, is going to be a shoo-in to at least try to advance and develop those skills. The boy that's 5'4" is going to have a much harder time. Now, there are some standout examples of not as tall people being successful even in professional basketball, but they are very, very few and far between. And at the other hand, there's also people who are very tall who tried basketball and were horrible. And there's actually some notable examples where they're just literally their genetics gave them an advantage all the way to getting into the professional sport, and then they fell on their faces. That's, again, just to highlight, in these extremes, weirdness does happen. And then, of course, if we narrow it in even more, we start to realize that those extremes do taper, right? It's a parabola. So then there's going to be a few people who are mostly tone deaf who could learn to sing on pitch, but are going to struggle to do that. Again, I worked with a children's choir for a while. They were dealing with that constantly. I will tell you though, it was incredible. I saw children, the first 6 months, they could not identify a single note. They could not match a single note. And the director would go right next to them, put his hands over their ears and go, ah, right in their ears. I know, sounds like child abuse. Believe me, he wasn't trying to be too loud, whatever. It was just so they could really resonate and feel that note. And over time, they figured it out. And on the other hand, I think actually talent on the high extreme is really dangerous because it's demotivating. You never learn how to work hard. And that kind of leads me to the final point. I want to make 2 final points here in this video, and then we can follow this up in more discussions. If you'd like, throw comments. I love to continue this idea. I love this conversation because I wish people would frame this more like this conversation, I mean. Here's my 2 points. First is, nothing beats hard work. Really does. Nothing beats hard work. And again, bring up the extreme examples, whatever, who cares? We're not talking about the extreme examples. We're talking about most people who are in the middle of the parabola, who have above average slightly talents or below average slightly talents. The person with below average slightly talents who's harder working than the person with above average will beat the above average person. You see this all the time in music. You see it all the time in business. You see it all the time in life. Nothing beats hard work. So if you want to be good at music, just work hard. Along with that same point is it's not actually that hard to become at a proficient, professional level at music. And I mean that relatively speaking. Of course, it's a lot of work, but it's not an impossible amount of work. We're talking somewhere between 3 to 4 years of an hour or 2 dedication every day of your life. Think about that. You spent however many hours in school learning math and history and science. It's not the only thing you've done in this life like that. If you have any relationship, you give hours of your life to that. If you have any hobby, anime, if you watch One Piece, you spent enough time watching One Piece to become a professional musician in that time period. If you literally just watched an episode while you practiced, you would be a professional musician right now if you're current with One Piece. The second point that I want to make is we need to we need to stop dehumanizing expert, amazing people like a Jacob Collier, like Justin, the amazing young jazz pianist, Justin Schultz. All these people, we have to start making them human. And the way we do that is realize first, they are really gifted. The same way that we'd see a 7-foot tall person and be like, wow, that person's really tall, probably good at basketball. But then the follow-up is that we have to go, wow, they're really hardworking and they really have a great attitude. And what can I learn from that myself? That's the real question, not how can I sort of suck away their essence or feel bad about myself or be jealous of them, but how do I learn from what they have and apply to my own life? I'm Robert Monroe. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe. It really does help. And until next time, you guys have a great day, great practice.